Hazard, spelled HAZARD, is a show about how to prepare, prevent, and prevail over disaster. And it's hosted by me, a comedian. So get ready to be flooded with puns. I'm gonna hit you with a tsunami of jokes. There'll be no sandbagging. We're gonna turn the tide on this topic. Too much? All right, I'm not trying to cause any waves. Sorry, let's get started. Sometimes it seems life is all about rules, policies, procedures, laws, guidelines. No matter what you call them, rules are meant to get us to act a certain way. And let's face it, a life without rules can be a disaster in the making, especially when dealing with Mother Nature's natural hazards. Can you imagine how differently the Three Little Pigs story would have gone if they followed construction rules? The big bad wolf would have been blown away. Our biggest protection against Earth's fiercest storms are the shelters we live our lives in, but only if they're constructed for resistance. I have a house full of teenagers. It is definitely a house full of resistance. The International Building Code may be one of the biggest rule books around. Guidelines found in the IBC and the IRC are more than just suggestions. They are tested and proven ways to promote the safety of communities by making sure homes, businesses, and facilities are built to last. The IBC is the base standard for safe building practices in the United States. States and local municipalities build on these guidelines to advise the safest way to raise a structure with specific hazards in mind. The federal government encourages the use of these enhanced building policies by offering incentives for certain behavior. But what's in it for them? Given that flood is the most common natural disaster in the United States, encouraging the design of flood-resistant homes could save taxpayers billions in federal disaster relief dollars. So, in 1968, Congress passed a law that created the National Flood Insurance Program. The program, referred to as the NFIP, basically has two faces. There's the sweet grandma side that helps you out when you're in trouble. Oh, sweetie, I bet you'd be happier if you elevated that ground floor, honey. You know, just in case a flood comes, baby. Then there's the strict dad side that forces you to do things for your own good. I'm taking away your Xbox until you anchor those floor joists to the foundation, son. What I mean is, the NFIP provides financial cover for people when flood wreaks havoc. But the program is also designed to encourage communities to build in such a way to be more resilient to flood. If you want the protection of national flood insurance, you have to play by the rules. The end game is to save money and mitigate loss.
McClellanville was and still is a small town. Through my lifetime, I've experienced a lot of hurricanes. We always had some water that came up in the yard, maybe right up to the steps of your house, and sometimes to the bottom floor, that sort of thing. Kind of accepted that as part of living in McClellanville. When I first took over as mayor in the 70s, actually, there was very little regulation here. You pretty much built what you were comfortable with, and you went by your own plans. There really just wasn't much overview by the town at all. Of course, the world changed after Hugo. Hugo brought water 6, 8, 9 feet higher than we had ever seen before, in my lifetime certainly. We had always heard about storm surges, but this was totally beyond anything we could really imagine. There was an immediate arrival on the scene of a FEMA representative. He also worked very closely with the town to establish a program to get people to understand what they had to do to be prepared for another event of that type.
Everyone in the coastal zone is at some form of risk, whether it's a Category 5 event or a Category 1 or even a tropical storm event. A lot of studies that FEMA has conducted in post-disaster assessments and laboratory assessments has determined that even in the coastal A zone, significant wave hazards can damage structures a half mile to a mile inland of the front of the beach. So there are always opportunities to improve your resiliency to floods. Whether you're a new property owner or a property owner who's getting ready to retrofit your home, FEMA's Coastal Construction Manual is a fantastic design guide to help you think about all of the risks and hazards that might affect your home. To break the cycle of disaster, rebuild, disaster is essentially resiliency. We need to build resiliency into the things that we do, not only as a personal property owner, but as a community.
If somebody had told me when I was 30 years old that we were going to have a 15-foot surge, I wouldn't have believed it. And the younger people coming up that have never seen such a thing probably need to be told. Get the word out, communicate. Our advice is just to look and see what's happened to other people, look at their plans, their ordinances, and see how they would work for your community. We're much better prepared now than we were 35, 40 years ago.
By designing buildings with predicted flood hazards in mind, the financial impacts of natural disasters lessen, both for individuals and governments. Plus, by making a building more resilient, there is less of a chance for costly repairs, which also makes for cheaper insurance premiums. It's a game of strategy and could be a win-win for all players, but not everyone follows the same rules. When we come back, how your score on something called the firm indicates which rulebook applies to you. Stick with us. This is Hazard. When it comes to the NFIP, your location on the firm is a big factor deciding which building codes apply to you. FIRM, F-I-R-M, stands for Flood Insurance Rate Map, which is a FEMA document that maps out flood hazards in a community. The flood risk of a particular area on the firm is identified with zone letters. X zones are the area that FEMA designates as minimal to moderate flood risk areas. X zones have more flood risk than some areas, but not as much as others. The riskiest areas of the map are called special flood hazard areas and are typically marked as an A or V zone. A zones have risks of flood from rivers, streams, or other nearby water. V zones are coastal and the most dangerous due to the hazardous wave action. Hazardous wave action, like not hazardous, hazardous! Firms indicate risk associated with a particular source, like a river or ocean, but does not consider localized flood concerns like blocked storm drains or ditches. The firm is only one part of figuring out your flood risk. Okay, so what do these letters have to do with building your dream home? Well, because they're tied to your flood risk, it also lets you know which NFIP building rules you should follow. NFIP is not the only option for flood insurance, but many private companies also use this flood zone as a factor when setting the premium. X zones are easy. You typically do not need to meet any additional design standards to remain in compliance with the NFIP. But listen, there is still a real risk of flooding in X zones, though less likely than some other areas. Approximately 30% of all flood damages occur to structures in these low to moderate risk areas. But it is the special flood hazard areas that require special treatment. To participate in NFIP, communities must mandate flood-resistant design standards in the risky A and V zones. Understanding that there is more risk in these areas is one thing, but to what point? That is where the base flood elevation, or BFE, comes in. BFE is a modeled height of flooding that is reasonably likely to occur in 30 years, the life of a typical mortgage. Statistics indicate that there is a 30% chance of seeing the base flood within a 30-year period. Basically, you want to be far above the BFE. So, if you have the luxury to live in a coastal V zone, you should understand that view comes with a cost. These zones are vulnerable to storm surge, sea level rise, and large storms. Property along the coast must be built to sustain major assault. To this end, properties in V zones are built high, I mean really high, at least 1 foot above BFE. Let's say your BFE is 5 feet. Now, if you live in a V zone, the NFIP rules say the bottom of the lowest floor and your utilities cannot be below 6 feet, which is 1 foot above the base flood elevation. The extra foot is called freeboard. And this board you cannot change. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The main thing to know about freeboard is that it is a way to hedge against that highest flood reaching your home. Land in A zones is also found near bodies of water and has a significant risk of annual flooding. You ever thought about that phrase, bodies of water? Just imagine these human-shaped water masses sloshing around. Did you know the human body is 60 to 70% water? We're all like 2/3 bodies of water. Anyway, that's not what all that's about. Like in V zones, A zone properties need to be elevated with the lowest livable floor and utilities equal to the freeboard height. Typically, this is not quite as high as in V zones. Many communities have a higher freeboard than what is mandated under NFIP. Charleston County requires homes in special flood hazard areas to be built 2 feet above BFE. Raising property above the estimated flood is one building requirement that protects homes. But what about all that space below? Well, there's rules for that too. In hazardous coastal areas, homes need to be reinforced to stand up to fast-moving, pressurized floodwaters and high winds. NFIP building regulations say that V-zone properties should be sufficiently anchored to the foundation. The building needs to be able to stay put if assaulted by fast-moving water or other forces. A-zone properties also need to be anchored, but do not have to meet this higher anchorage standard. Also, the area below the BFE should be free of obstructions so that high floodwater can flow freely. In V zones, you can enclose this space, but the walls can only be made of lightweight lattice or bug screening. Breakaway walls can be used also. These are designed to cleanly detach under flood conditions in such a way that it does not cause damage to the structure of the house. This area beneath the lowest floor can be used for parking or storage, but not as a living space. It also must be made of floodproof materials, and special consideration must be given to utilities and surrounding structures. Man, that's more rules than canasta. But don't worry, a cheat sheet of sorts can likely be found on your county government's website. Residences and businesses are adapting to increasing flood hazard by putting in place new floodproof technology that changes the game in special flood hazard areas.
Every 3 years, you have new building codes that come out, your IRC and your IBC, residential and commercial building codes. And about every 10 or 15 years, you have new flood maps, and about every 15 or so years, you have new FEMA technical bulletins. All these play a big role in how construction happens in flood zones. Wet flood proofing is when the first finished or livable floor is designed or built at or above the base flood elevation, and any enclosed areas below that have to have flood openings to allow the automatic entry and exit of floodwaters. The water picks up everything in its path and pushes it up against that foundation, and you want to use an engineered flood vent to allow all of that stuff to get in and out. But what you'll commonly see on a lot of your historical older properties, whether it's a plastic or a metal, it's going to be a standard foundation or air vent. This mesh screen gets jammed up with all that debris, then you don't get any water that can equalize, aka get in and out of the screen, because this is clogged with leaves, debris, pine straw, etc. Most new construction properties in flood zones utilize engineered flood openings because they automatically open to allow the entry and exit of that flood water and debris. Dry flood proofing is the use of flood panel or flood barrier type products for commercial properties that are in flood zones. Wet flood proofing, again, is when the first finished floor is elevated to the base flood elevation. With a commercial property, you can dry flood proof it, and the first livable floor does not need to be elevated, it can be at grade. So you use flood barriers or flood panels to protect your doors and your windows below that base flood elevation height. There's a real threat in the low country of a very bad storm. We've been getting lucky in the last 4 years. We've almost had a storm every single year that's grazed us or somewhat hit us, but we are quite literally one storm away from maybe a catastrophic event. And if people don't take flooding seriously in this area, they're going to be in for a rude awakening. The positive side of that is the building codes exist for a reason if they're followed correctly. Charleston County, again, Class 3 CRS, already going above and beyond the NFIP standards, which is a positive. And all passive type engineered flood openings, flood gates, flood-proof window systems already exist. And that can drastically help the potential flood damage and, again, decrease the flood insurance premium, so it's a win-win to use those type of systems.
When it comes to making plans, you are the best. Remember the best planned 90 minutes of your life? Or that surprise party for your parents' golden anniversary? You get the golden planning. The same way you plan each detail for those moments, start planning to protect you and your loved ones from a natural disaster. Sign up for local weather and emergency alerts. Prepare an emergency kit and make a family communications plan. Protecting your family is the best plan you can make.
When you look at the number of disasters in the U.S., chances are every area will deal with some kind of emergency in the next decade. And between school, sports, and social lives, chances are you won't be with your kids when it happens. Will they know what to do? Ready.gov/kids has the educational tools and information to make the conversation easy. When the time comes, chances are they'll feel prepared, not scared. So talk with your family today.
They put all these rules on us, policies, regulations. Well, old Keithy's got some rules for driving. Can you please put your turn signal on before the turn? And dude, quit picking your nose. You're not alone. We can all see you. And are you really sitting there on your cell phone and eating? The light is green, come on. And let's talk about the parking lots, y'all. Please, put your buggy away. We saw you use it. We know you can do it. Keith's International Codes for the Roads. I like it.
Now we know who needs to follow the rules. Let's look at when these rules apply. The NFIP does not compel individuals to build or rebuild to the newer standards. However, communities who choose to participate in the program must set policy that meets or exceeds the building requirements for each flood zone. This means that NFIP communities and its citizens must build to these flood-minded standards to get the benefit of the program. Exceptions were written into the law to grandfather in existing structures until such time as substantial improvement is needed. I wonder why they call it grandfathering. Probably because back when Granddaddy was building, they didn't have all these rules. Nobody told Granddaddy what to do. Granddaddy did what he wanted. Substantial improvement is a specific construction term referring to any improvement or repair that would cost at least 50% of the structure's current market value. The land value is not factored in. The substantial threshold can be met by any type of reconstruction, not just the result of natural disasters. The market value would be the home value before any damage occurred and before construction. The value would be determined by a licensed appraiser. The cost of the work would include the labor and materials needed, even that which was volunteered or donated. Who's volunteering and donating all this labor and materials? And how do I get a hold of them? So let's play a little game. Meet Homer, the 1960s house worth $160,000, and your son and his college football playing friends come home for the weekend, and they decide to have a football game inside your home, and they do $85,000 worth of damage. A and V zone homes would need to elevate and use flood-resistant materials to rebuild. X zone homes could just rehabilitate the home. Waiting for substantial damage on your home may not be the best strategy in hazard prevention, but the cost of floodproofing improvements might deter some families. Still, even homes outside of special flood hazard areas have risk of flood. And flood risk is not a set it and forget it concept. Changing floodplains means new flood hazards can creep up. It's a good idea for all homeowners to evaluate their own risk and to do so every few years. Some flood-minded improvements can go a long way for protection and peace of mind, whether the rules require it or not. Stick with us. This is Hazard.
The exact path of the storm may not be certain, but what is certain are the steps you can take to get ready. Make a plan. Outline contact information for your people and evacuation routes. Download emergency alerts to your phone. Listen to directions and updates from local authorities. And have conversations with your people. Discuss steps to prepare with your family, friends, and neighbors. Visit ready.gov for tips to prepare to protect yourself and others.
And how do they decide which facilities are critical anyway? I'd like to be on that committee. Hospitals, I get that. Schools, my kids would disagree. City Hall? Yeah, I guess. Question, did we officially add liquor stores and home improvement stores to that list? And I would also like to propose that we add fast food restaurants and any facility with a great happy hour.
We've laid out the rules for new residential homes and those getting significant remodels, but non-residential structures follow a different rule book. One reason is because of their role in the community. If a hospital were to suffer severe damage from a natural disaster, the effect could multiply the devastation. Critical facilities are those that are essential for the delivery of crucial services and the protection of the people. Think emergency response facilities, hospitals, police stations, utilities, or those buildings used for the storage of critical records. We're talking critical, but I don't see salons on the list. Because of their status, FEMA recommends that all critical facilities be located outside of all high-risk flood zones. Federal funding could be revoked otherwise, unless engineers can prove the necessity of building such structures in the risky areas. Commercial facilities are those structures where business is conducted or land that generates profit. Think shopping centers, hotels, restaurants, warehouses, or office buildings. Okay, there's my salon. Now we're talking. Any property that is zoned or used solely for business purposes can meet a lower standard for flood resistance when built in flood-prone areas. Lower standard? Have you seen Ricardo's work? Likely, in the case of flood, commercial structures will be empty while everyone is hunkered down at home. I guess that's true, solid point. I'm not driving through floodwaters, even for Ricardo's best mani-pedi. While residences should have a way to allow floodwaters to move relatively unobstructed, commercial facilities can be wet or dry flood-proofed below the BFE. In other words, these buildings can use techniques that keep floodwaters from entering the property at all, even at lower elevations. If commercial structures do use wet floodproofing techniques, the standards are similar to new construction in residential areas, like using flood-resistant materials and elevated service equipment. Communities must choose to participate in NFIP. It is not a program that is compelled by federal government. Any participants that do not actively enforce guidelines and assess properties could lose the program's protection. Regardless of NFIP, construction policies that do not consider or enforce flood prevention activities could end up costing property owners more. Plus, vulnerable municipalities have a responsibility to consider floodproofing options for public property like roads and certain public buildings. The building codes set forth by the IBC are only the minimum requirements for construction of a building. Often, flood-prone communities set standards a bit higher. Communities can increase the standard by raising the freeboard, requiring a buffer between buildings and wetland areas, or limiting building in the floodplain altogether. For every $1 spent to make buildings stronger, the American taxpayer saves $4 in disaster assistance, according to the National Institute of Building Services. Strong building codes regulate the design, construction, alteration, and maintenance of structures to best protect the health, safety, and well-being of occupants. Communities who restrict building in special flood hazard areas, or those that use a higher standard, can receive an insurance discount through NFIP's community rating system. But even if your community does not participate in the program, building for flood resistance can still offer many long-term benefits like increased property value, reduced losses during flood events, and peace of mind for residents. Fortifications of our communities means more financial assistance for those hit hardest. It's a smart move to ensure your home can meet the challenge. Thanks for watching. This is Hazard. You know, just in case a flood comes, baby. Scary. Scary.
Otherwise, you'll get this knife to the forehead, sweetie.
Oh, she doesn't sound that sweet. Where would you like me to go with that voice? No grandma from the grave?
Sweetie.
That's hilarious.